Hello, Mr. Lucas.
Hello, Mr. Ryan.
We're the Horti-Culturalists and we put up a video every week, so don't forget to subscribe and of course press the little alert button so it'll remind you when our next video comes up.
And you'll want to, because I'm sure today is going to be extraordinary, but I don't know what it is. Stephen, what do you have in store? We're in your nursery, Dixonia Rare Plants.
Yeah,
What's
but
going on?
we're not staying here. We're going to somebody else who is an interesting plant grower,
Yep.
who has a passion for a group of plants that I know very little about how to grow and look after.
Do tell, what are they?
They're tuberous begonias,
Aha!
and they are the most incredible, I would say, honestly vulgar flower known to man.
Can you be honestly vulgar?
Yes, of course you can. Yes, of course you
Own
can.
your vulgarity.
Yeah, they are big, they are blousy, and they are remarkable to look at. They are eye candy beyond belief.
Okay, well, let's not beat around the bush. Let's go.
All right, fantastic. Well, Matthew, welcome to Tuberous Begonia
Tuberous
Gardens.
Begonia heaven. I do not think I have seen so many begonias in one spot ever. Oh, where do we begin?
I think we begin by introducing you to Peter Harris, who is the doyen of Tuberous Begonias.
Hello, Peter.
G'day, guys.
Thank you very much for welcoming us to
You're
your
welcome.
less than humble nursery. Is it fair to say you are a begonia specialist?
Eccentric, a tuberous begonia eccentric, I would say.
An eccentric.
Eccentric.
The nursery industry.
spirits.
Yeah, kindred spirits.
They're
the nursery
all
industry.
strange folk.
We need more eccentrics in our lives. So yes, that's perfectly logical, and it's normal for most garden people to become obsessed.
So what we're going to do in this video is actually Tuberous Begonias 101, is it not, Peter?
That's correct. We'll start from seed sowing. We'll go right the way through cultivation. We'll go through we'll cover you with staking, and all of the mistakes that happen along the way.
Oh, there'll be no mistakes here though, Peter, I'm sure.
Everything you've ever wanted to know, and then some.
And we're too frightened to ask about Tuberous Begonias. Let's go.
All right, come on, folks.
All right.
All right, so Peter, they come from the Andes and Central America, but whereabouts in nature do they fit?
Okay, so within the canopies of forest, they're the ground dwellers. So they'll be understory plants. They'll cling to crevices. They like well drained, anywhere well drained, dappled light. They're an understory plant. So if you're thinking of orchids, anything that wants a shade, ferns, begonias snuggle in there as well.
I'm already thinking that mine are in the wrong place. But anyway, thank you, Peter. We will get to that.
Okay, you can get away with a little bit more sunlight if you're in the altitude. We
Yep.
obviously are at a 700 metre elevation up here in the Macedon Ranges.
Yep.
The closer you get to sea level, the more protection from the sun they want. For example, we can cheat a little bit up here and we can give them morning sun. You won't get away with that. You'll burn them. And which, by burning, I mean the leaves will go yellow, the growth will be stunted, they'll be little squatty short plants.
Great, that sounds really
sorry.
attractive.
No, I'm sorry. You've got to simulate what happens in their natural environment.
I guess the first... So I am obviously a rank amateur, Stephen is a horticulturalist, and you are an expert. Can we talk firstly, these are all tuberous begonias. So
Correct.
What is the origin of tuberous begonias? Where are they from?
They're from Bolivia and the Andes, Peru, so Central America.
Yes.
And the original tuberous begonias are nothing like you're seeing here. This is hundreds and hundreds of years of human intervention.
Yes.
So our original tuberous begonia, mother,
Yes.
shall we have a look?
We can. So Peter, I love an origin story. You mentioned Bolivia as the ancestral home for tuberous begonias. Tell me about what it may have looked like in the wild.
Okay, so originally, before human intervention made these wonderful double flowers, Mum and Dad originally were a single seed-grown orange flower.
Yep.
And from that, it was also grown for its leaf structure and its leaf veins.
Yep.
So human intervention took the tuberous begonias from the Andes in the mid-19th century into Europe. There were several species used to get to where we are now with the pollination. it's probably simplest just to say boliviensis was selfed, and then there are a whole bunch of European rose flora species that boliviensis got crossed onto. And the hybridization is done, once again, not to go back to the boliviensis, but to get it into the myriad of colours and forms that you see today.
Would you say then this foliage is fairly representative of what
the original
would have
Tuberous
looked like?
Begonia looked
So
like?
it's got really
Absolutely.
beautiful red veining.
Venation, absolutely, yep.
And is that something that you try to select? Would you bother with the foliage of Tuberous Begonias?
With the work I'm doing, both sides of the leaves, with the work I'm doing, sometimes I'll pick a plant for its form, its flower colour, or the leaf colour. The plant isn't flowering, the leaf form is an attractive unit by itself.
This is stunning. So let's go back to Mum and Dad.
Mum and Dad.
Because we all love our parents. So this is
Tuberous Begonias.
what it would have looked like.
Right, this is what it looked like. Tuberous Begonias today have two forms of flowers on the one plant.
Okay, now we've had this conversation about the birds and the bees, and it took me a while to understand it. We could perhaps use this plant to explain that.
We will, okay.
In family-friendly terms.
In family-friendly terms. The boy bits have to come into contact with the girl bits.
Yes.
So the way we pick the boy bits is on all plants, not just Tuberous Begonias. They will have the anthers, the stamens, and the pollen sacs.
And you can quite clearly see the pollen on the petals. We'll come in and show you.
The dust shortly.
Yeah.
Now the girls with all plants will have the ovaries. Now on Tuberous Begonias, the ovaries at the back. On a lot of plants in the plant world, the ovaries will be at the base of the flower.
Yeah.
With Tuberous Begonias, we need to move the pollen from the boys onto the girls.
And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the origin of the species.
It's where it all started.
There you go. All right, well, I think now we should start to look at some of the tricky technical aspects of actually growing them.
So what we'll do now is we'll go from, we've done the pollination, we've picked the seed, we've dried the seed. So I think now we'll go through showing you the seed, we'll go sow some seed, we'll show you the first stages, and we'll get into potting up of a Tuberous Begonia.
Let's go.
Let's go, let's do it.
All right, you and Matthew spoke of the birds and the bees when it comes to begonias, so I guess the next thing we need to do is talk about seed collecting, seed sowing, all the things to do with seeds, Peter.
Okay, so we've pollinated, we've picked the seed, we've dried the seed pods. Now, what happens with the Tuberous Begonias, each pod has thousands and thousands and thousands of tiny seeds in them.
Oh my goodness.
And obviously, we can't sow all of the seed onto one tray. I'm making a bit of a mess of this, Stephen, but let's persist through here.
Yep.
Okay, so this would be the seed collected in 2020 from one red begonia cross with another
like
red begonia cross. It's a cross that I have made to select specifics, whether it be height, whether it be leaf colour, as we mentioned earlier, or whether it be flower form.
Yeah. So you've got this very, very fine seed. It's almost like dust.
It's Tuberous Begonia seed at one point in the 80s was more expensive per gram than gold. This isn't all viable seed, Steve.
Yeah.
This looks like there's thousands and thousands of seed here, but basically there'll be chaff, which is the non-fertilised seed. Just because we put pollen on doesn't mean that the pollen hit every single little dormant ovary. Now if the seed's round, it's viable. If it's round, it will roll. So basically, if we tap the pad, all seed rolling down the pad,
you can actually see them rolling.
Is viable.
Yeah.
Now there'll be seed caught back up here, which is very, very fine. It's dust. It'll never germinate. There's probably enough there to sow 1,000 plants. So will that do us for a start, Steve?
Yeah, 1,000 plants will be fine, thank you.
That'll keep you busy on the weekend.
Yes,
won't
it would. Yes,
All
it definitely
let's
would.
move that one to the side. Now, the next thing is we need to prepare our record keeping. So on your label, you need to put your crosses, your dates of sowing, your parentage, and the year you collected your seed. But Steve, the next thing I'd like to say is, for the 35, 40 years I've been in the nursery industry, I've used all sorts of marker pens, and they always wash off. I've found these old-fashioned school grey leads, 6B pencils. For all you keen gardeners, the best thing for labelling your plants, they don't wash off.
And that's really important. All those indelible ink pens, I've yet to come across one that will last. They just fade off. So that's good.
That's correct. Okay, so let's pop the label in our tray first, Steve.
Yes. First things first.
First things first. I put my labels over at an angle because we live with a magpie and she tends to find them if they're sticking up and they get
And
dragged
take off with
everywhere.
them.
They do. Once again, sowing Tuberous Begonia seed, because it's so fine, I would normally mix this with some soil or some talcum powder, which I don't have at the moment.
Yeah, it doesn't matter,
So
yes.
let's assume there's talcum powder here so we can judge how thickly we're going to sow our seed.
Yeah.
Okay, so all I did then was tap the paper, and I just want the seed to start coming in a continuous stream. Now I'm using my imagination,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking I'm putting about 10 seeds per centimetre. And it might not seem like many, but...
That's a lot of plants you've already potentially created.
So what I would do next is to leave a centimetre or half an inch and come another one.
So you get a sort of a rough line of seed all the way across the tray.
You're getting a rough line,
Yeah.
absolutely.
All right, Peter, so we've sown seed, and you told me that, within a fortnight we've got little tiny cotyledons, we've got these minute little begonias coming up. Now we've got a tray in front of us here. At what stage are these? How old would these ones be?
Right, Steve, these are now 6 weeks of age,
Yep.
and as you can see, they germinated particularly well. We've certainly ended up with more than our 250 as we discussed.
Yes, you certainly have. In fact, I can see one that's even trying to flower already.
It is.
It's madness. So they're quite young still, so they're only 8 weeks old.
Yes.
They're quite thick in that tray, so now would be the time that we would now look at potting on, I guess.
Okay, yep. So with potting on, where we used a fine soil for our seed raising,
Yep.
we'll now be using a much more open soil.
Yeah, so you've got a much coarser soil here. It's got quite a fair bit of chunky sort of pine bark medium in it.
Pine bark, peat moss and sand, once
Yep.
again in here. And we use about 30% of each.
Yep.
That's just a mixture I've snuggled in with.
So you will then prick those out into these little wee tubes individually.
So what we do is we take them out of the seed tray. We've got to give them space. They can't stay like this. And generally what happens with the vigorous ones are, they're the rubbish ones. They're what I call the rubbish ones. So they'll just be a single flower.
Yeah, so they will be vigorous plants, probably throwing back more to the original species, perhaps?
They will, basically, yes. And as we showed you earlier on, the species flower were the single ones,
Yeah,
which is this guy,
yeah.
and the semi-doubles, which will be these big ones. I know that from experience. These little tackers here, they'll be the good hybrids that I'm chasing. And if you look at that one compared to these two,
This
is what I'm after.
Yeah.
Yes.
So good full double flowers, which you'll still have male and female flowers on the one
Correct.
plant. So we'll discuss that a little further later, I think. So when you, I don't know how you even tackle something like, oh, I see, you just pull it out of the tray.
Okay, because we've had a particularly good germination with this cross, there are many seedlings come up. Okay, so because I don't have to panic about quantity here, I generally tend to put 2 or 3 to a tube. If one dies, I haven't wasted time, I haven't wasted the tube, I've still got one to go along.
All right.
As once again, with transplanting all seedlings, we try to get as much root ball as possible. We put them in about the same depth they are in the seed tray.
Right.
Tiny little bit of soil on top. That's just in case I've fractured a stem or there's some roots on the surface.
Right.
And a quick tamp down. That's all
Now,
we need to do.
At this point, though, do you feed them or do anything to them initially?
Okay, or they'll now need watering in because we've got to remove the air. There's lots
Yep.
of air in there now. There wasn't a lot of air in their mama tray.
Yep.
So basically we give them a water in. I immerse this tube into a bucket of water and let the water drain away. And with feeding at the same time, I just use any slow release fertilizer.
So that will be enough to gently feed the plant through until it gets to the next stage.
Okay, that will feed the plant until our next stage, and that would be at about 4 weeks of age.
And here we have some tubed ones that you did. So what age are we looking at with these little fellas here?
Okay, so we tubed up our little fellas from the seed tray 4 weeks ago.
All right.
4 weeks down the track, our fertilizer is basically exhausted, and we've got a plant which I'll tip this out. We'll have roots around the side of the tube. The heights will vary, but we have a full tube of roots.
See, there's good root system there. It's holding the ball together nicely.
Absolutely.
So that's ready now to go on into its more permanent pot.
Correct.
So we've just potted that or taken that little 2-inch tube out, but the original plant had 3 or 4 plants in the pot. So how have we ended up at this point in the proceedings? Did you actually take out some of the extra seedlings, or do they actually naturally disappear at some point or another?
When I pot up, whether it be this one,
Yeah.
which will just give us 1 colour flower per pot, or whether we leave it, I will pot these, and when it goes into the market and people come along, they'll see 2 or 3 different flowers in this pot and they get a bonus.
So you won't cull necessarily?
I won't. They'll all compete quite happily.
Yeah.
And
But you
they'll
could
go
end
along
up
the
with
flower.
3 different colours in the one pot.
You will end up with 3 different flowers, whether they be the same colour or different colours.
Peter, oh my goodness, my tiny brain is just exploding with all this begonia info. I grow tuberous begonias. I'm realising I'm making so many mistakes. I could almost weep, but you take a deep breath and carry on.
Now, here we go.
Here we go. Okay, so we've gone from 0 to 100. We've grown them from seed. I now have this plant. How do we look after it for its flowering cycle?
Okay, so we now enter into the grooming, fertilising, general maintenance for health of the plant.
Yep.
The first thing we should talk about is watering.
Let's talk about watering.
Okay, so with the tuberous begonia, once again, they're from the Andes, they're an understory plant.
Yep.
They get it when the foliage above lets it through. It's that simple.
Okay.
So you will kill your tuberous begonia with too much watering. My general rule of thumb is I pop my finger down to the first or second joint.
Yep.
If I can feel water or it stains your finger, leave the bloody thing alone.
Okay.
You will kill it with too much water.
Okay.
You will not kill it
Okay.
with not enough water.
All right. I think we've all got that. Now, there is a question. You read a lot about, oh, your begonia must not have any moisture on its leaves.
Yes.
Is this the case with tuberous begonias? Talk me through the why or the not or the wherefores.
Okay, so tuberous begonias, we should discuss pests and diseases. Tuberous begonias disease problems really is powdery mildew. Now, powdery mildew...
I have had, not personally, but my begonias.
have had powdery mildew. Powdery mildew is caused by water sitting on the leaves, getting cold. You'll see it on roses occasionally.
Yes.
Yep. So water your begonias morning before lunchtime if possible. It's not always possible in here. I have to water when I have the time. For your tuberous begonias at home, they need to go to bed with dry leaves. You won't get powdery mildew that way.
At all? Will you put that in writing?
Absolutely. The second problem with pests and diseases of tuberous begonias probably are the bitey, chewy insects. We don't spray for it. We generally just use mechanical control.
Otherwise known as your hands. Picking them off.
Picking them off. Look, we've got a huge frog population around here. I've got a little magpie that runs around eating things. She's good control.
With the life cycle of the tuber, how long are you going to get a flowering period from each season?
Okay, so a flowering period is from, depending on your location, anywhere between January and May. So
for
summer
us,
into the autumn.
Summer to so whether
like
you're in the northern hemisphere or the southern
Northern
hemisphere.
hemisphere, summer into the autumn. Each individual flower, as a cut flower or on the plant, will last around about, as a cut flower, 2 weeks.
I'm amazed that that they'd survive. They seem to me something that'd be very droopy and they wouldn't do well in a vase.
Yep, a good 2 week shelf life.
Goodness.
On the plants, I've had a month. Each flower will last a month. We'll go
Really?
through and deadhead this, or just
Next
as...
question.
Next
Deadheading,
question.
does that promote more flower production?
Absolutely. Tuberous begonias, unlike a lot of bulbs, don't seem to have a predetermined height. So we will leave plants in a 200mm pot, 8-inch pot, or in a 12-inch pot. The difference in height is around about 20 centimetres.
So it just keeps going.
They keep on
The
going.
more love you give it,
The more love you
bigger
give
it
it,
gets.
the more it rewards you.
Goodness me.
With tuberous begonias, you can encourage bigger flowers. Big is good.
In some cases,
Okay. So basically, to get more size in the flower, we need to remove female flowers. I'm sorry, girls. Matthew, it's okay. It's okay. It doesn't hurt the plant. So basically, it's simple. It will break out fairly easily.
Now-
Need to look for
yes,
the ovaries. You need to have the little winged seed pod.
which we saw before, and it's these little these little bits just here. Now, what is the logic of this then? So the male flowers are the ones that are bigger and blousier?
The blokes are the big, showy, pretty looking ones, okay?
Show
what more
off,
can we say?
yes.
Yeah. So we don't want the plant for our purposes. It's display here now. What we want is to encourage flower size.
Right.
So we don't want the plant to put nutrient into the females.
seed
I'm not
potential.
going to use every female flower in here to make seed with. We probably set 200 seed pods a year. So we let 200 females go through and we pollinate.
But it's not detrimental if you just leave it to do its thing and to flower as it wishes, both male and female?
If you leave them on, you'll get many smaller flowers with the females, single flowers around them as well.
Right.
Not detrimental to the plant at all.
There you go. Interesting to know. Let's talk food, Peter. Food.
Right. So we've done water.
Yes.
Now let's do the fertiliser.
Yeah.
We're halfway through the growing season. Once again, we'll go through and do a top-up now with a 3 to 4 month slow release fertiliser.
And so, when we were looking at the potting stage, you have already put slow release fertiliser into the mix when
Correct.
you potted it?
Yes. And now we're giving just a top-up, just to finish the flowering season off, put on extra growth. The more growth it's putting on now, because the flowers are taking a lot out of the tuber, we want to get extra growth to pull back down into the tuber, which is the starting off of the dormancy season.
All right, now Peter, we're going to use a little imagination here.
Okay.
So we're going to imagine we're now in the late autumn and our begonias are starting to go into their dormancy. So how does the process work?
Okay, the first thing that happens is the daylight hours. Now the daylight hours are drawing in. They're going to start yellowing. The flowering is going to slow down. The flower size is going to reduce. So we're at the end of autumn. If the begonia hasn't started to show yellowing on its leaves, even leaves falling off, pinch it. So by pinching it, all we do is we take the growing tip out of it.
Yeah.
That will tell the plant it's time to go to sleep. Because if the plant's been kept inside, it's getting artificial light. So it doesn't know what time of the year it is. Which brings me to watering. Watering a tuberous begonia heading into dormancy can be tricky. Once again, we're not getting the summer sun. The tuber's starting to pull back as much of that nutrient as it wants. So the leaves are going yellow. They're falling off. Don't break them off. Let Mother Nature do its thing. As it goes into dormancy, halve your watering. So if your finger was showing that it needed a drink every 2 days, open it up to every 3 days. Just as a rule of thumb.
Right.
And slowly decrease it. And the plant will show you. It will become more and more yellow and more will fall off the plant as it goes
Including
into
stems,
dormancy.
of course.
Stems and all, Stephen.
Yeah,
it's a
so-
tuberous begonia.
Yep.
It all disappears. And you remove your begonias to store them over winter. Begonias need to be stored in dry conditions protected from the frost. So generally, when we start our tuberous begonias off, it'll be early spring.
So will they have already started to move on the racks? Are they going to show you something that will give you the hint that this is the time to deal with them?
What we do is we go through the racks, and particular crosses, depending on their parentage, some will move earlier, some will take a little bit longer to move. And we ran through earlier on and grabbed some. They'll show you that they're ready to move. They're ready to start shooting. They're ready for potting.
So you can actually see the buds are starting to move on that. So
Absolutely.
that would be the time you would then go, all right, now is the time to pot up, and we'd go through basically the same process as we did with the seedlings, except we'd be potting up tubers, wouldn't we?
We're doing exactly the same thing. Too much water will kill your tuberous begonias at this stage, just like the seedlings. So with potting a tuberous begonia, to start it, generally we don't want to go from the tuber. Now the tuber sizes will always vary into their final pot, because once again, the tuber in its final pot will be dwarfed. It will have far too much water held around the root system.
When we're talking about tubers, we're doing the same thing with the tubers that we did with the seedlings, basically. So we're starting them off in a smallish pot. So if I was starting off my young tubers, what size pot would I normally start with?
Okay, so the pot, once again, it's not set in concrete. The pot needs 2 to 3 centimetres, so what's that, an inch and a half, inch to an inch and a half
around
diameter, all the way around the outside of the tuber. And out of that same rack came this little fellow. Nothing wrong with him. He's probably a better flower because he's a smaller tuber. Once again, we still want around about that inch and a half, 2 to 3 centimetres around the outside of the
you
tuber.
would go for so you'd pick your pot size depending on the tuber.
Got to pick your pot size depending on the tuber. So we go through and grade for our pot sizes.
All right, so we're using your standard potting mix, so something
Correct.
with a bit of oomph to it and some coarser material.
Some body. Yep.
How deep do we want to plant our tubers, Peter?
With the tubers, we generally will put them about 1 centimetre, depending, not at all relevant on the size of the tuber. Yeah. It doesn't matter. We put them around about 1 to 2 centimetres below the soil surface.
A little less than an inch.
Literally screw the bulb in, give it a shake.
Right.
That's all we need to do. There are no new, if there were new roots coming, if it has happened to shot away from the old root system, we would then
actually open it up.
Open it up and pop him in. And even though that started to shoot, we would still pop this down under the surface.
Yeah. The question is, which way is up? I can tell which way is up here. I take it because, well, I can see little buds just starting to shoot, so that would obviously lead away. But I can also see the scar there where the last year's
stem was, correct.
So you then know which way is up. If you did plant one upside down, what would be the consequences of that?
Have you ever had a plant blown over in the wind?
Yes, I have.
And gone back to it 3 days later? What's it starting to do?
It starts to grow.
It starts to grow towards the light. Absolutely.
See, here I am. I'm learning lots.
So Mother Nature, if you plant the bulb upside down, or if you're not sure how to plant any bulb, always pop it on its side. Yeah. Mother Nature will make it go right. It doesn't matter.
All right, Peter, we've talked about propagating begonias from seed.
Yep.
And we know that from seed they're genetically individual plants. So say, for instance sake, I particularly liked this beautiful double white that you've got here. Yep. I want to reproduce that plant. So can I cut the tubers into sections and create more begonias that way?
All right, first, the obvious answer is, well, why not? Yes, of course, it's a tuber. So you think potatoes.
Yeah.
Tuberous begonias, absolutely not. First of all, a tuberous begonia is one of the few plants, once cut, will never, ever, ever make root down that cut, scarred surface. So what you're asking from your 2 tubers is to perform as well as when they were 1 tuber.
Yeah.
And it's got half the amount of root system, so it can't possibly do it.
So we've said no to that, so that's fine. I'm happy with that.
Okay.
All right. Now, that then leaves us with cuttings. Now, how does one grow tuberous begonias from cuttings? When is the best time to do them? Basically everything we need to know.
So tuberous begonias can be propagated from vegetative cuttings. Yeah. You could do tuberous begonias with a stem cutting and with a leaf cutting.
Uh-huh.
No, there you go.
I was going to ask that because other begonias you can grow from leaf cuttings.
From leaf cuttings. Yeah. Okay, so you need, with your stem cuttings, I'm just going to take this one off so we can get rid of the excess.
Right.
Okay, so what we have done is we've cut our plant. We've left probably 1 centimetre, half an inch of growth above the next bud.
Where the node is.
So what Mother Nature will draw down, and then it will seal off. And this piece is now redundant. It will fall off of its own accord. The bud at the base.
That is counterintuitive to most types of pruning, though. So that's a point we need to make at this point here. Ordinarily, in most pruning, you cut just above the node so that there's a dormant bud there, and that will grow away from there. So, but what you're saying with the tuberous begonia is you've got this very sappy piece of stem here, and that will slowly cut itself off because it's got nowhere to go.
Inbuilt.
Yeah.
In the tuberous begonia, there is a sieve plate mechanism, kind of like a litmus paper. So the plant will take down everything it wants, it will then seal off automatically, and the section will fall away. Okay, so we've got our cutting taken. Now what we need to do is, this plant is going to strike roots, it's going to grow, it's going to then go into dormancy like our bulbs. We need to make sure that we've put a bud underground from the day it's propagated. So basically to do that, you notice where we cut the plant, we cut it with a bud. Yep. And it's the same system. We're going to cut a bit above, we're going to let Mother Nature pull it back, it's going to shrivel. All right, great cut.
So that's our cutting, and you've got one bud, you've got a piece of stem just below that bud and leaf, and you've got basically a blind piece of wood above, or a piece of stem above.
Correct. So what's going to happen is this is going to feed the rest of this plant
Ah,
while
that makes sense.
it's rooting.
Yeah.
A good thing to do right now is to remove these two little wings, which
Oh,
are
yes,
just bud protectors, each
Yeah.
sheath each side.
And they would rot in the propagating.
Underground, they would rot. The next thing we have to do with all cuttings is to reduce the leaf surface, which is the plant's going to want to keep this leaf alive. It's got no roots on it.
Yeah.
We need to reduce the transpiration. I cut about 2/3 of the leaf
All right.
off.
So that's a prepared cutting.
This is a prepared stem cutting.
Now-
Before we go putting them into mixers,
Yeah.
we'll do the second form.
Oh,
of
that's right,
cuttings.
the leaf cutting.
We
Yeah.
can do a leaf cutting and a tip cutting.
Right.
So with a leaf cutting, when you're preparing your cuttings, you get leaves taken off and thrown away.
Yeah.
Like, we don't want that leaf there, we'll get rid of him. That leaf, once again, will strike.
Ah.
Nice square cut,
Yeah.
reduce the surface.
Mm-hmm.
You keep that one for later.
All right, so that will actually take
We'll-
root and it will send out an adventitious bud at some point or another.
We'll tackle that one in
Yeah.
a minute. So that leaves us now with a tip cutting. We still need to put that bud underground.
Yeah, right.
That bud is what the new tuber will shoot away from next year. This one doesn't yet have a bud.
Yeah.
That will happen as the rooting process takes place. The plant will also produce a bud.
The question then is, this leaf cutting, is that going to put it behind the 8-ball on these other types of cuttings because they've already got a bud, or will this catch up?
That will catch up.
Oh, goodness me. All right.
Now, with our tip cuttings, the next thing we need to do is remove the flowers.
Yes.
We don't want it to flower. It's got no roots. It
Yeah.
can't physically do it. Once again, as with the sieve plates that are in the stems, just take the flowers. They'll break off just below the neck.
All right. So, and again, that's sort of counterintuitive for most other plants because you'd remove the whole flower stem. But in the case of these, they'll actually use that to feed them.
Well, they'll use it to feed it. They'll use it to seal off naturally. Most hormones, even the lightest grade hormone, will burn Tuberous Begonia cuttings. Now, if you want to use anything, you can use 5% honey water solution. Dissolve a teaspoon of honey in a 250 milliliter cup of water. Warm water. That's as good a hormone as you need.
One little stem, we've actually created 3 cuttings, all of which are slightly different in the way they've been produced. And so we'll end up with 3 identical double white. Fantastic. Now, Peter, we've prepared our cuttings. You've shown me 3 different techniques of taking cuttings out of the one stem. So my mind is still going boing, boing, boing. But I guess the next thing people need to know about is what sort of medium would you use to strike your cuttings in?
Look, we use exactly the same media for our cuttings as we do for our seed raising, which is once again the John Innes compost, 50-50, sand, peat moss,
And sieved.
and sieve.
So it's the fine one that you'd use for your seedling. Now, assuming we've got this ready, it's slightly moist. Show me what you do with a new cutting.
We've learnt along the way, you will kill your Tuberous Begonia with too much water.
Yes, all
The
right.
cuttings are exactly the same.
All right, so we've been told.
We've started off with moist potting mix.
Yeah.
That's all they need now. It doesn't
Right.
need to be filled capacity. Now, that is when you put the water in and it stops running out the bottom.
Yep,
That's
right.
filled capacity. It doesn't need to be that. It just needs to be moist potting soil.
All right.
So let's tackle our tip cutting first.
All right, let's show me what I would do with a tip cutting.
Okay, so with the tip cutting, we've cut it to that 1/2 centimetre below. We're going to insert it now around far enough to hold the cutting upright.
Yeah.
So we put them in around about 1 centimetre deep and firm them in. That's all we need
All
to
right,
do.
so I'm not now going to water that in.
Doesn't need any more water.
All right.
There's plenty of water around in that soil mix, in that tuber, to go through and for the tuber to strike.
And where do I now put this cutting?
Okay, so the next thing we need to do is, it's got no roots, it's got no ability to photosynthesize. We need to give it some cover. For you guys at home,
Right.
management, as you can see, went to no expense spared, and we have a great little mobile greenhouse.
So just a PET bottle.
Any clear, it must be clear because
Yeah.
we need the light to get
Right.
in. If they're white or they're brown bottles, light cannot penetrate.
And we
Plants
leave the
need
cap
light.
on?
We leave the cap on. We keep the humidity high because we're trying to keep moisture around its leaves.
So how do we know when it's all happened?
Okay, so it's going to take 3 weeks for this little guy to make roots.
Yep.
3 weeks is a fairly standard time for stem cuttings and tip cuttings
Yep.
to root away. So after 3 weeks, just take the lid off. And
So you're going to wean it gently. You're not going to take the bottle away straight away when you know it's got roots.
Correct.
You give it that little bit of extra air, and that will just gently bring the plant along.
Harden it up,
Yeah.
just ever so slightly.
So how long will you leave the bottle like that, do you think?
I'll leave this for another 2 weeks.
So we're looking at about a 5-week.
Around about a 5 week from
Yeah.
cutting to the struck plant, and then you can remove the bottle totally. Okay, now not all cuttings strike the same. That of course will work for the tips cuttings,
Yeah.
and it will work for the stem cuttings.
Right.
Because
But a
we
leaf.
have, we have an anchoring point,
Yeah.
but the leaves have got nothing to anchor them.
Ah, so they're likely just to topple or lean over.
Once again, insert the stem, but it can go a bit deeper because there isn't the sheer volume.
Yeah.
So we'll push the stem down around about 1.5 centimetres. So what, 2/3 of an inch?
Yeah,
around
right.
about. Now that's great, but what's going to happen when we put the bottle on there, Steve?
It's likely to sort of move around a bit.
Correct, and it's going to topple. So basically what I then do, it's not going to hurt the leaf. It's
I'll
not.
hold that for you.
Thank
there.
you so much.
Yes.
It's not going to squeal,
Yeah.
but we need to keep the plant upright. Just a bamboo skewer, any kind of wooden skewer. Metal will be fine too.
All right.
And that will hold the plant. That will
Goodness
hold
me.
everything upright.
Yeah, right. So that's good.
And now we need to repeat the process once again with the little artificial greenhouse over the
All right,
leaves.
over the top.
And the same, round about the same time frame between the leaf striking and removing of the bottle.
Now,
5 weeks.
having said that, though, your stem cutting would have obvious new shoot coming out from there.
Correct, yes.
Where I assume that the roots on this leaf cutting will come out at the bottom.
At the cut surface, correct.
Where will the bud come from, and how will you know it's produced it?
And where the roots come, a tiny bud will grow as well. The
So it'll
same with
form at the base.
the form at the base,
Yep.
and then once again grow up towards the sunlight.
Yep.
And yeah, 5 weeks, we're starting to think, yeah, everything's struck. We can take the lid off and harden him off. You may not see that shoot above ground in 5 weeks. It might take a wee bit longer. I don't fertilise at this point. We want it to make roots. We don't want it to be fat and lazy.
All right, fantastic.
Once again, so much to blow my mind. The flowers here are extraordinary. There seems to be very different sorts of flowers. What are the key types of flower forms that you get with Tuberous Begonias, Peter?
Matthew, the
Yes.
first thing we'll go is the flower forms.
Yes.
So with Tuberous Begonias, our first flower form is the single form.
Yeah.
Right, you take that one.
Yeah.
Now it's single because it has a single row of petals. That's
Yes.
all there is in the flower.
Yes.
And then the next form
Yes.
is the semi-double form.
Yeah.
Okay, now that has more than one row of petals, but it's not fully double because we can still see the centre.
Yeah.
The third form is a fully double flower. Okay, so that's a full head of petals.
Which
right?
is extraordinary.
So now within that, we get broken into flower types of the
Yes.
doubles. So they come in a rose form.
Yep.
Then we get the ruffle form.
Yes.
Which is just nice big rose form, but with nice crinkly petals.
Yep.
And then you get the fimbriated form, which is even more ruffled. And
Extraordinary.
then the flowers get broken out into more categories, if I haven't confused you enough.
Peter, tell me the types of flowers that you have in Tuberous Begonias.
So they come in the solid colours, which we can see here, and the orange one in front. And then they come in bi-colours, which are blends of colours. It might be a contrasting colour at the backs of the petals and the fronts of the petals. And then we come in the picotees, which is of contrasting edge on the petals. And with picotees, it's only the edge. Picotees do come in a reverse picotee, which is solid with a white edge, but it's still a picotee edge. They are the flower colours within begonias.
All right, Peter, the next step on this amazing journey has to be the staking of Tuberous Begonias, because I think there's a little bit of an art to it. So please take us through what we're looking for when we're staking.
Okay, so we've got our plants now in their final pots, and Tuberous Begonias have a front and a back side. So basically what we want to do now is stake the plant up so the weight of the flowers doesn't break the growth off the tuber, because we need all of that growth to go back down into the tuber as it goes back into dormancy.
So explain what the back of the Tuberous Begonia is so that people can get a sense of which bit we're looking for.
Okay, Steve, so see the front of the plant where it's fully furnished with leaves?
Yep, right.
Now if we turn the plant around, I'm holding this because he's got no stake in him, there's the back of the plant. So it's not attractive, but it's the way the plants grow. There's nothing we can do about it.
So
It's the
they
back.
are a one-sided plant piece.
They're a one-sided plant.
Right.
So what we're going to do is pop a stake at the back of the plant, so you don't have to look at that inside.
Now,
And
I've
you
got
can
another
pop
question as you're going to insert that stake into the pot.
Yeah.
We have a tuber under there.
Yes, we do.
How do we avoid shoving the stake straight down through the tuber, which I think is a reasonable question?
That's a good question. What happens is the tuber has shrunk in size because all of the goodness that was in that tuber is now up in here. So a tuber that was approximately 2 golf balls in size is now probably 1 golf ball in size. So we have to assume from the top of the stem there's about an inch of bulb all the way around there, right? So with the stake, we'll just go give ourselves 2 inches to the
So
left or
well
the
away
right.
from the tuber, so it's safe. Right?
Well and truly away. The next thing is with the string. I use strings. With Tuberous Begonias, you can't use a string that absorbs water, so a cloth or a material string. Anything that's nylon, because nylon doesn't absorb water.
All right, well, that's a good little hint.
So if you've got water sitting around the stem, it'll create a rot to set in. Okay? So Tuberous Begonia tying is like most tying. A figure 8, you want to be above a leaf so the leaf can hold the string upright. If you don't put the string above a leaf, it'll slip down. Okay, so a simple figure 8, left over right, and pull it back up to the stake. Okay?
All right.
Okay, and just we've left plenty of room around that stem as it will continue to expand as the plant grows.
Now, another question, you've tied it about that height there on this plant. Is that sort of a normal height? It's sort of
for our
just
first
under
tie.
half the height?
Just under half for our first tie.
So you'll be doing this later?
We'll now put another tie on. A week or 2 have gone past, the plant has grown another 6 inches. Right. Let's whack another tie on him, which will be its second last tie. Okay, so we repeat the process. Plenty of room around the stems. That stem will keep expanding over the growing season.
So what did we do with the one that you didn't stake?
Okay, so I can't get around them all the time. So unfortunately, the weight of the flowers has broken it away from the tuber.
Is that the end?
No, don't despair. Okay, look, this happened maybe 2 days ago.
Yeah.
And lo and behold...
Oh, it's already got a little bud starting to shoot.
Look what's happened. Now, this plant may not go ahead and flower for the rest of this season, but it will grow and it will create enough nutrient for the plant to pull back as it goes into its dormancy. It's a self-contained unit, it won't die.
Peter, I noticed there are 2 types of begonia forms. One seems different.
Floppy. Floppy.
So what's the story between those 2?
Okay, so the Tuberous Begonias are broken once again into groups. They're broken into the cascading or the pendulous varieties.
Such as this one, which is stunning.
Which refers to both the branches and the flowers. So they go out and down like a big waterfall. And then they come in the upright, erect or staking varieties. Which simple. The flowers sit aloft, a big rigid
and you can see the stem is obviously much more upright
rigid
than the other.
Yeah. And just because they're an upright variety, you can still put it into a hanging basket and look at your flowers from afar, or you can grow this one as a standard and have on the dining table. It doesn't matter.
Do you stake the pendulous ones in the same way as the upright ones?
For ease of us and what we do, we put stakes in them for transporting. So far as the baskets, they're being held up there by the wires, but if the wires weren't there, they would fall down the sides of the pots and be pendulous,
So you can just let them naturally, you don't have to stake the pendulous ones?
Without them breaking, as we showed you earlier on with the upright ones, the break, they'll keep going quite happily.
Now, you just mentioned that about having these on the dining room table. So, can you grow them completely indoors from the very beginning of their cycle to the end?
Providing they're getting enough light.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and you don't want them in a continually heated 40-degree house. So as long as they're warm during the day and cool at night, they're quite happy. They want dappled, reflected light. They don't want to be stuck in a westerly or a hot northerly window.
Or hot southerly window, depending where you are.
Or hot southerly window, depending on which side of the hemisphere we are.
Indeed. Peter, my goodness me, my tiny mind has just exploded. I have learnt so much. Thank you. And I know that our viewers have learnt so much because it's extraordinary. Your begonia knowledge, second to none.
Good. Thank you very much.
I have been completely outside my comfort zone all day as well. So there you go.
That's saying something,
that's good
Stephen.
for you. It's good for you.
Of course it is. It's great because it means that I've learnt a lot today, as well as everybody else having the opportunity to.
Quite amazing. Now, we will put all the links to your nursery below, and you have an event coming up, which we will also link below. So
Cool.
if you're lucky enough to be in Victoria or Australia, make a beeline.
Come along and have a look.
The Begonia event is running from...
February until May.
There you go. So you'll be able to come and see and buy, which is more important, isn't it?
And,
not?
and get hands-on, absolutely. We're not behind display cabinets where people can come and mingle and wander.
And ask you questions.
Ask me as many
Mind
questions.
you, no one will need to after watching this.
With a bit of luck, you've got it right.
Well, thank you so much for giving us your time and letting us wander through.
That's okay. Thank you very much. The check's in the mail.
Oh my goodness me. Now, secret confession, I actually do have 2 tuberous begonias. One I now know is upright and one I now know is pendulous. But Stephen, I have been doing so many wrong things.
Yeah.
It's a miracle that they still grow and flower.
Well, that's one of the things about those sorts of groups of plants. They'll often grow despite you, but if you are trying to grow them really well, then you need the sort of information that Peter was able to give us.
Oh, and it was so fascinating. So I don't think we really covered this, but where do you sit on the begonia fence here? I love them unconditionally.
All right, well, I like looking at other people's. It's a group of plants that I can appreciate the techniques and the care and the love and the attention that is in fact bestowed upon them by their growers. But I'm probably not one of those people that wants to put that sort of time into growing them. So I'll go and see them at Peter's when he has his display open.
Yes.
Which will start at the first weekend in February and go right through to the end of May. So that's every weekend right through then. And so people should get in the car if they're nearby and drive out to 691 Ashbourne Road.
We'll put that detail below. And I have to say that Peter's greenhouse, walking through that, it's just... It's extraordinary. The colour, the form, the variety of those plants en masse is just stunning.
It is. It's fabulous. And of course, those of you who are in other parts of Victoria may well know that, in fact, we have a major begonia festival that is held at the Ballarat Botanic Gardens every autumn. And they hold the National Collection for Plant Trust of the tuberous begonias. So you've actually got 2 places you can go to look at them. The plants at Ballarat are all vegetatively propagated named varieties. Peter's are all seedling raised plants, and you've got sort of a commercial grower as opposed to a botanic garden. So there's lots of interesting differences that you can see by going and visiting both collections.
And obviously the begonia genus is vast.
And they're naming new ones virtually
As
weekly.
we speak.
Yeah.
And you know what? You did mention, I overheard you saying to someone, if you're interested in a type of plant, join the local society.
Yes.
Stephen, I took your advice to heart and I have joined the Melbourne Begonia Society.
There you go, and it's the best thing you can do because any specialist society will not only give you access to the information that you're likely to need to grow the plants well, literally centuries worth of growing experience amongst all those people, but also it will give you access to plants that are generally not available commercially. So that's where the really good part about these societies is.
I may have joined just for the sale, which was extraordinary. But the thing is that, as you said, there were amazing growers there who specialise in a certain type of thing, and you can just learn so much.
It's a fabulous thing to do, and I am sure there are begonia societies all over the world.
I was going to say, wherever you are in the world, there is bound to be a begonia society. So that's a good place to look, to try and find someone like Peter who is full of knowledge and so generous with his time. So once again, thank you to Peter.
Oh yes, definitely. And we'll be back next week with a completely different group of plants or plant. Who knows?
Who knows what it will be? But if you want to find out, you'll have to hit subscribe and the notification bell, and you'll know exactly what our next adventure will be. But until then, we'll see you next week.
Yes, bye all.